The hangar was quiet that morning, the kind of silence only found on a base that's seen too many years. General Cole Matthews entered with the same steady steps he'd used for 4 decades, precise, measured, controlled. But something stopped him. An old man, bent from age, was polishing the floor near the wall where the unit's insignia hung. His movements were slow but exact, like he'd done it 1,000 times before. "Morning, sir," the janitor said, not looking up. Matthews nodded. "Morning. What's your name?" "Frank Dalton." The general froze. That name, it wasn't possible. That night, Matthews couldn't sleep. He went through old files in his safe. Dusty folders from the Vietnam era. He found it. Operation Iron Valley. 4 helicopters went in, 3 never came back. The commander of the 4th, Viper 1. Real name, Franklin Dalton. Declared killed in action. But the man who just mopped his hallway was that same name. That same voice. Matthews stared at the faded photo. The grin under the helmet. The confident eyes. The same ones that looked at him today. Older, yes, but unmistakable. He called the Pentagon next morning. Every record confirmed it. Captain Franklin Dalton, deceased, 1971. The general hung up, his jaw tight. Someone had buried a hero twice, once in the jungle and once in the system. He went back to the hangar. The janitor was there again, humming low under his breath. Matthews walked closer. "Dalton," he said quietly. "Tell me something. What was your call sign back then?" The old man looked up, the mop still in his hand. "Viper 1, sir." And just like that, 40 years of ghosts came rushing back. That night, the general sat at his desk, hands trembling slightly. If Dalton was alive, then someone had hidden it. And for a reason. He needed answers. He poured himself a drink and stared at the old photo again. 4 men standing in front of a Huey helicopter, grinning into the camera. Every one of them gone, except the man holding the mop. Matthews whispered into the empty room. "Why did you come back, Viper 1? And why now?" The next morning, the base buzzed like a stirred hive. Rumors spread fast. The janitor wasn't who he seemed. A few young soldiers whispered, half-jokingly, that he'd once flown with the ghosts of Nam. Others laughed, calling him Grandpa Viper. But the laughter stopped when Dalton walked by. There was something in his eyes. Not bitterness, not pride, just silence. The kind that made men straighten their backs without knowing why. General Matthews couldn't let it go. He'd seen too many men fade into forgotten files, their names swallowed by bureaucracy. But Dalton was different. He had been there. He had mattered. And someone, somewhere, had erased him on purpose. That afternoon, Matthews called in a favor. A contact at the Defense Records Office, an old friend who owed him more than one drink. "Pull everything you've got on Franklin Dalton," he said. There was a long pause, then a sigh. "Cole, you don't want to dig there. His file's been sealed since '72. Even I'd need clearance from upstairs." Matthews leaned back in his chair. "Then start climbing those stairs." 2 nights later, an envelope arrived. No name, no return address. Just a single word on the front: Phoenix. Inside were a few declassified documents and a black and white photo. Dalton, younger, standing beside a Huey, arm around a group of children, Vietnamese orphans. The caption read, "Unrecorded evacuation, March 1971. And then, below that, "Mission not sanctioned. Subject acted without authorization." Matthews read the line again and again. Dalton had disobeyed a direct order to save kids. That's why they buried him. Not because he failed. Because he did the right thing. The general found him that evening near the hangar, sitting on a crate, watching the sunset bleed over the tarmac. Dalton didn't move as Matthews approached. "You disobeyed a command," Matthews said quietly. "Yeah," Dalton replied, "and I'd do it again." He finally looked up. "You ever see children running through napalm, General? You'd disobey too." Matthews said nothing. The weight of that sentence pressed between them like a fog. After a long silence, Dalton added, "They told me the war would end if I kept quiet. Said the world didn't need another scandal. So I stayed quiet. 40 years. The next week, the Pentagon called. They'd heard whispers of the general's personal investigation. A voice on the line, polished, bureaucratic, cold, warned him to stop. "General Matthews, with respect, we advise against pursuing this matter. It's ancient history." "Ancient history has a way of catching up," Matthews replied, and hung up. That night, he sat alone in his office again, replaying the conversation. He thought about how easily they said it. Ancient history, as if men's lives were just dust in a file. He picked up Dalton's old service photo from his desk. The edges were worn, but the face was still sharp, alive. He knew what he had to do. By dawn, the general had written a formal request to reopen Operation Phoenix Echo. He attached the photo, the documents, and one sentence. "If honor still matters to this country, start here." He sent it through the secure line, knowing what it meant. Investigations, hearings, whispers in the press. And maybe, finally, the truth. That morning, when Dalton came in with his mop, Matthews stopped him. "Frank, you might want to take the day off." The old man frowned. "Why's that?" "Because by tomorrow morning your name's going to be all over Washington." Dalton chuckled, low and tired. "I never wanted fame, General. Just peace." Matthews smiled faintly. "Then maybe this will finally give it to you." That evening, as the general left the base, he turned for one last look. The hangar lights flickered, casting long shadows. Dalton was still there, one hand resting on the Huey's frame, his eyes lost somewhere in the past. And for a brief second, Matthews could almost hear the rotors turning, the chaos, the screaming radio chatter from 50 years ago. He blinked, and it was gone. Just an old soldier and his ghosts. But deep inside, Matthews knew something had begun. Something bigger than medals or ranks, or the silence of men who'd seen too much. The past was waking up. And when it did, the whole country would have to listen. The storm broke fast. By sunrise, the Pentagon was already calling. The request Matthews had sent up the chain had detonated like a bomb. Phones rang nonstop. Memos flew. Every officer who'd ever worked on Phoenix Echo was suddenly unavailable for comment. And the press, God bless them, had caught the scent of blood. By noon, the Washington Ledger ran the headline. "Forgotten Vietnam pilot found alive. Cover-up suspected." Matthews read it in silence. He wasn't proud, exactly. But there was a grim satisfaction in knowing the machine couldn't hide behind silence anymore. Frank Dalton stayed home that day. He didn't watch TV, didn't answer the door. His small apartment was filled with old photos, medals he'd never worn, and a single, folded flag in a wooden frame. He sat at the table, a cup of cold coffee in his hand, staring at the news article someone had slipped under his door. His name, in bold print, after 50 years of being dead. He whispered, almost to himself, "Guess they found me again." Outside, the world was finally remembering. Inside, he wasn't sure he wanted them to. That evening, Matthews came by. No uniform this time, just a man visiting another man. He found Dalton, sitting by the window, the sunset painting his face gold and red. "You've stirred a hornet's nest, General," Dalton said quietly. "Wouldn't be the first time," Matthews replied. He sat across from him. "They're reopening the case." Hearings, testimonies, everything. Dalton smiled faintly. Too late for justice, but maybe not too late for truth. The general nodded. They'll try to twist it, say you acted reckless. Say you endangered your unit. Dalton looked out of the window. They said that the first time too. And yet those kids I saved, they're alive somewhere. Maybe with children of their own now. That's enough for me. The hearings started a week later. Closed doors, gray suits, cameras kept away. Matthews testified first, calm and precise. He laid out every piece of evidence. The mission logs, the altered files, the testimonies of men long dead. Then they brought in Dalton. The old soldier stood slowly, his back straight, his voice rough but steady. I didn't do it for orders. I did it because it was right, and if that's wrong, then maybe we were fighting the wrong war. Silence filled the room. Even the reporters, hidden behind the glass, stopped typing. One senator leaned forward. Mr. Dalton, are you aware your actions directly violated command structure? Dalton's lips curved slightly. Sir, I'm aware that sometimes the right thing doesn't wait for permission. That quote made headlines the next morning. It was printed, shared, carved into memes, and written on walls in veteran halls across the country. For the first time in decades, the name Franklin Dalton meant something again. Not a ghost. Not a forgotten pilot. A man who'd stood his ground when orders told him not to. Matthews watched the coverage from his office, exhausted but proud. His staff brought in coffee, but it went cold, untouched. He couldn't stop thinking about the cost, the years of silence, the weight of guilt that both men had carried. When the verdict finally came, it was short and cold. Captain Franklin Dalton is hereby reinstated with full honors. His record shall reflect extraordinary bravery under exceptional circumstances. It wasn't everything they deserved, but it was something. A single honest sentence in a world that preferred convenient lies. That night, they met again at the hangar. Dalton ran his hand along the metal of the old Huey. She's still here, he said softly. She's a relic, Matthews replied. Dalton smiled. So am I. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Matthews broke the silence. You ever think about flying again? Dalton chuckled, the sound rasping from deep in his chest. Only in my dreams. But maybe that's enough. They stood together in the dim light, two soldiers from different wars, bound by the same code, that some things are worth breaking ranks for. Outside, thunder rolled across the night sky. Inside, for the first time in 50 years, peace began to settle. The following months were strange. Frank Dalton became a symbol overnight, an unwilling hero of honor, defiance, and quiet courage. Veterans sent him letters, hundreds of them. Some wrote to thank him, others to say they finally felt seen. He read every one. He didn't reply. What could he say? Words felt too small for 50 years of silence. General Matthews visited often. Sometimes they didn't even talk. They'd sit in the hangar with 2 cups of coffee and let the hum of the airbase fill the quiet. For men like them, silence was language enough. But time, as it always does, began to take back what it had loaned. Dalton's health started to fade. He'd walk slower, breathe heavier. One morning, Matthews found him sitting inside the old helicopter again, his hands on the worn controls. You shouldn't be up here, Frank, the general said softly. Dalton didn't move. She still listens, he whispered. Then, after a pause, funny thing, Cole. I spent my whole life running from that day. But I think I was always meant to come back here. Matthews stepped closer. You've already made peace, old friend. Dalton smiled faintly. Peace, maybe. But some stories don't end, they just fade until someone remembers them again. That evening, a small ceremony was held. No press, no politicians. Just a few soldiers, some veterans, and a flag. Dalton was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. When the medal was pinned to his chest, he looked down at it for a long moment before saying quietly, "Too late for the man I was." But maybe not too late for the truth. When the ceremony ended, Matthews helped him back to his car. "You ever think about what comes next?" the general asked. Dalton chuckled, eyes glinting under the fading sun. "Yeah, I figure when I go, I'll hear those rotor blades again, and maybe I'll finally get to land." 2 weeks later, Matthews received a call. Frank Dalton had passed away in his sleep. Heart failure, they said. Peaceful. But when Matthews arrived at his apartment, he found something odd. A note taped to the wall beside a photo of the Huey. It said, "Don't let them bury me as a janitor." Below it, a folded letter addressed to the Department of Veterans Affairs. Inside were his service papers, his reinstatement, and a single request. "Scatter my ashes where the Huey flew last. Let the wind remember what they forgot." Matthews felt his throat tighten. He stood there for a long time before whispering, "You old bastard. You always knew how to write your own orders." A week later, the general kept his promise. He took Dalton's ashes aboard a training helicopter, now retrofitted for ceremonial flights. The young pilot beside him, barely 25, asked quietly, "Sir, was he really that good?" Matthews looked out over the horizon. "The best," he said, and not because he followed orders, but because he didn't. As the Huey climbed higher, the wind howled through the open hatch. Matthews opened the small urn and let the ashes scatter into the air. They caught the light, tiny silver sparks dancing across the endless blue. Below, the base stretched out, small, still, timeless. He could almost hear Dalton's laugh carried on the wind. It wasn't loud. Just enough to remind him that some echoes never die. When the helicopter landed, Matthews stood alone on the tarmac. The sunset burned red over the horizon, the same red as that long-ago jungle sky. He thought about all the men who never came home, all the stories locked away in silent files. He reached into his pocket, pulled out Dalton's service photo, and placed it on the dash of the Huey. "Rest easy, Viper One," he murmured. Then, more quietly, "Mission accomplished." The rotors slowed, the air stilled, and in that perfect silence, it was as if the war, for just one moment, finally ended.